Hey everyone, welcome to another artwork analysis. Now, I talk a lot about characters and figures when it comes to art, but this time around, let's move on to something else. Now, of course, one thing I haven't talked about are environment painters. And one of the best ones I know of when it comes to painting city environments would be Jeremy Mann. He has a very distinct style, and it is worthy of studying his work because he has an incredible sense of creating that chaos that you might have in a city. And you kind of get a feeling of just how loud a city is just by looking at his work. So how does he do it? I'm going to be talking mainly on point number one, which is his idea of impressionism. It is the fundamental way in creating that feeling. And of course, there's a lot to talk about there. But I will also briefly talk about depth. Now, a few weeks ago, I talked about Dofus the movie about depth. Now that was animation. This is fine art, so it won't be the simple three-layer idea, but there will be some overlapping elements for that. And number three, I'm going to be talking about the signature, which is a little tidbit, but you'll get what I mean when I get there. So, Impressionism. First, we have to understand right from the get-go what the name Impressionism implies. It's the idea of creating an impression. You aren't making very obvious takes on what something should be. You are merely creating an impression of something through illusions and letting the audience create and finish off the picture, so to speak. Now, a lot of people get the idea that Impressionism is just random strokes on a canvas. This is not the case. In fact, if you're looking for that, that would be called abstraction. Impressionism is different in that regard. Abstraction is when you're putting strokes on a canvas and it doesn't really resemble much of anything else. It's just abstract for the sake of abstraction. It might be for design purposes. It might just be completely random, as with a lot of people who don't know what they're doing, trying to do abstract art. But whatever, that's on their end. Impressionism is, first and foremost, you are trying to create a scene despite the fact that you might be leaving a lot of the painterly elements behind. So what do I mean by that? Okay, so right off the bat, we look at this picture and we already know this is a city. We don't even have to take 2 seconds to guess that. We just know right off the bat. But despite the fact that we know this is a city, let's zoom in on some of the areas. So if I were to zoom in like this would be an abstractionist piece by itself. Because we don't have the context of the rest of the piece. So this might be good on the wall as an abstract piece. Maybe it'll go for a few million on the auction house. But given that we don't know what's going on, this would be just it. It would just be nothingness. It's just a design element. Now we can zoom in here as well. Again, I want you to look into this area. This is a tower. We feel this is a tower. This is a skyscraper. But look at this. When we zoom in, oh, now it's a really fancy $20 million abstractionist piece. We don't have the context of the rest of the piece. So what's my point? Impressionism is largely based on context. And there are levels of detail that must be controlled in order to create a complete scene in Impressionism. you must be very careful if you are choosing to do impressionism. It's just not about random strokes and leaving strokes behind. It's not about laziness. There's a reason why I really, really respect the style and why I choose to have it in my work as well. There is a level of challenge when it comes to impressionism. So we have to look at any impressionist piece as a whole. And there are sections where we can zoom in and we will know what it is. So where is it? The focal point. This is the most prominent area of the piece. Now, of course, you could argue there's a lot of chaotic elements, that's part of a city, but it's clear based on the color scheme, based on the level of detail, we notice that, hey, this resembles a car. This thing right here. That's because Jeremy Mann deliberately put enough details on this particular section to create the impression of a car. Now, let's go back to the previous point. If we were to just zoom in here, what the heck is this? This is just an abstractions piece. Because we don't have the context of that detailed car in our vision, we think this is just random lights. This is just random blotches of paint. But in context of what's here, now we see there is a car here. There is a road that resembles traffic lines here. There's a crossing here, as we can see. There are just little elements here and there that, because we compare our vision with the focal point here, everything starts to make sense. We have the impression of the city based on one relative element. Now, that's not to say everything else isn't creating that impression too. It's not just this car. But again, impressionism is a test of challenging the artist to create the picture, the bigger picture. Let me repeat that in a better way. Impressionism is always going to involve the bigger picture. And it is the style of testing the artist on what their knowledge of the bigger picture is. Every element here is going to, because it's juxtaposed in such a way that it resembles a city, it gives the impression of a city. Let me repeat that. Because these elements, these blotches of paint, are all placed in such a way that it creates the impression of a city. Again, everything has to come down to the bigger picture. Everything in Impressionism. We don't have to paint the details on these towers if we don't need to, because we can relate them to the rest of the piece, and we can relate to the detailed areas that he decided to put down. So how would I put that in more clearer terms? So let's say I'm an audience member looking at this piece. So right off the bat, again, we see this as a city. But what is our subconscious telling us when we are analyzing this piece? We are seeing a car, we're seeing a road, and then we're seeing that perhaps these blotches of paint are really high up. Our minds are thinking, okay, cars are this. We know what a car is. We are mostly in a society where we all have seen how tall a car is, so therefore everything else here seems really tall in comparison. We have visions of what a city might look like, so we complete the picture based on the information we are given. Again, we are given the impression, and we are completing the picture because of our prior knowledge as well as the juxtaposition of the blotches of paint. Do not mistake impressionism with abstractionism. Now, I'm not saying that abstract work is not useful in some ways. Abstraction is very, very good when it's done by the right people. There's a lot of design elements that make it really appealing to look at. But the idea of impressionism is we are first and foremost trying to create a scene. We are creating an impression of a scene that we let the audience complete for themselves. So, that said, we really have to look into, again, the level of detail. Look at where the details are placed on. So, we already talked about the car here. Now, I've talked about before, our visions work in weird ways. We can only focus on one element and everything else becomes blurry. This is what Jeremy Mann and Impressionism in general tries to create. We are creating the illusion of a scene based on human vision. Human vision is not very good. We can only, again, focus on one thing. Therefore, everything else could be a bit blurry and it will be fine. Now, that's not to say you can be completely negligent and just have everything really sloppily done, but we can really notice that there are deliberate areas where it's simplified. So here, there's simplification here. Do we really need details there? Probably not. But there are little details here to give hints. Little hints that these are skyscrapers. And little hints here, look at these red lights here. So while it's not detailed, we can complete the information based on these hints. You want to just give just enough to the audience to not make them lost, but at the same time know what they're looking at without giving it too obviously. That's impressionism. Look into just how much detail you are rendering for your pieces and sort of like try to subtract details as you go along. I know that's counterintuitive, but over time you start to understand, hey, certain areas don't need details and certain areas do, and that's when you can naturally put it down based on what you need in your artwork. Hopefully that makes sense. Impressionism, again, is one of my major influences, so I'm going to be trying to look into it in future videos as well. So number 2, depth. So depth is something I talked about in my previous video with Dofus the movie. However, because it's fine arts, we're not going to look at it from animation terms. We have more time to look at a scene in fine arts in comparison to animation, therefore we don't really need the 3 layers of depth in order to create a really obvious sense of it. However, there is a sense of foreground, midground, and background, but it's not entirely obvious. So background, obviously, I would say something like this. Foreground would be cars here, as well as the creation of depth from the road here. We are being led towards the center of this piece. And of course, we have the middle ground, which is the skyscrapers right here. I'm going to use a different color. Now, you might think this might be a bit simple, and you would be correct. By no means am I saying this is animation level of depth creation. There are definitely a lot of nuances when it comes to this piece. However, you can take the fundamentals, the idea of animation depth, the idea of foreground, midground, background, and maybe make it a bit more complex. So in this case, yes, sure, you could dissect this piece into 3 sections, but we obviously know some skyscrapers are farther than others, some cars are farther than others, so it's not entirely black and white compared to the Dofus video I did. But really, again, think about where you are leading the audience with the elements of depth. So again, the fact that we are comparing car sizes, is creating the illusion that some cars are farther than others. The fact that our roads are leading towards a perspective point, a vanishing point, will do that, as well as the walls here. Probably Eden Center in Toronto. No, I don't think he's from Toronto, but yeah, basically a street with lights here. The lights are fading away into the vanishing points. And of course, the skyscrapers, the elements of the skyscrapers are getting smaller as they are going farther into distance, and that creates depth. This type of depth, again, might not be very useful when it comes to animation because we wouldn't have time to analyze all of these elements. In fact, impressionism tends to be pretty hard to use in animation in general because of the fact that impressionism can take a while to read. Even though, yes, we can see this is a city, a lot of these details are just going to be lost if this was seen in 1 second when it comes to animation. So last but not least, the signature. This is a very seldomly talked about thing, but signature matters. And every artist has their own little idea of where they want to put the signature as well as what they want to make it look like. So, given that Jeremy Mann is an impressionist artist, he incorporates his signature in an impressionist manner. It fits. You wouldn't see him spell out his name like this because it wouldn't be appropriate for his work. But you might find some cartoonist who does do this, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's, again, relative to your style. And of course, color-wise as well, Mann probably didn't want his signature to overtake the focal point. As with many artists, you do not want to have too much showing of your signature. Imagine if he did something like this. Probably too much, and again, it takes away from the piece. It's part of the road in this case, and part of the picture. Think about signature that way. It is part of the picture. It's not separate from your picture. It only enhances it. It's a compositional element. If you might even want to have time, spend even a week of thinking about how your signature should look. I guarantee you'll make it better and you'll make your work better because you put emphasis on making a good signature. That's something a lot of artists don't do, by the way, so treat it as a little secret. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.